Discover the Tree of Life, the Kabbalistic map of 10 interconnected sefirot that represent the divine emanations. These sefirot are organized into parsufim, integrated groups that act as living configurations of divine energy. The partzufim reflect this harmony in the human body, aligning the sefirot as symbolic centers of light. Thus, the sefirot function together as a living whole in the universe and within us.
Shalom, shalom. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you once again on Mishnah TV, a channel where we study the scriptures from a Hebrew, academic, and modern perspective, and where history, journalism, and spirituality come together. Today, we continue the journey we began in the previous class, as this week we are studying worldwide Parashat Bo, where we analyze one of the deepest structures of Kabbalah, the relationship between the 10 sefirot and the 10 plagues of Egypt. We saw then that the plagues were not arbitrary punishments, or total destruction as occurred, for example, according to the biblical text with Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis, but that in the case of Egypt, there were precise manifestations of spiritual forces that descend from the highest levels of spiritual reality to the physical world, with a clear objective: to break the spiritual structure of Egypt and liberate Israel not only historically, but also ontologically. In that class, we established an essential foundation. Each plague corresponds to a sephirah and acts as a correction, in Hebrew tikkun, a repair. Today we take a deeper step. If the 10 sephirot are the divine forces or manifestations, then the partzufim are the way in which these forces are organized, interact, and express themselves as complete systems. Understanding the partzufim is moving from seeing the map to understanding the dynamics. It is a new level of understanding of the biblical text. Therefore, in this class, we are going to study 3 fundamental things, which I ask you to keep in mind from now on. First, what the partzufim are, not as an empty technical definition, but as living structures. We will see how the partzufim are complete configurations of sefirot, comparable to spiritual personalities, and why without them, it is impossible to understand the real functioning of the world, according to Lurianic Kabbalah, because it was the Arizal, Isaac Luria, who published these studies. The second topic you will study today, if you stay in our class, the relationship between the partzufim and the plagues of Egypt, specifically the division between the first 7 plagues, which are found in the Parashat Va'era, and the last 3, which are in our Parashat today, Bo. We will analyze why the first 7 affect dimensions linked to Zeir Anpin and Malchut. You will understand what these Aramaic words mean, while the last 3 operate at much higher levels, linked to the higher partzufim. This explains why the last plagues are qualitatively different, more absolute, and more irreversible.
And third, what you will learn in minutes, the correlation between the 10 sefirot and the human body, in parallel with what in other traditions is known as the chakras, meaning that the sefirot and the partzufim are a kind of Hebrew chakras, but permissible, accepted, or kosher, if you'll allow the expression, because at first I understand you might be afraid. It might seem like pagan
knowledge, but when you study the scriptures and the oral tradition, this is very important. You will understand many things. And we will study all of this, not from a superficial or syncretique perspective, but by showing how Kabbalah describes a perfectly structured spiritual body, where each sephirah has a concrete expression in the human being. This will allow us to understand why the liberation from Egypt is not only a historical event, celebrated at Passover, but an internal process that is reactivated in each generation. Always keeping in mind the promise of the prophet Jeremiah, that a worldwide redemption will come, as written in Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 to 34. Now, if this type of content provides you with clarity and depth, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, to visit our website, lamishna.com, where you will find the same class in written form as supporting material and more information on the topic, and to leave your comments on the video, which I will personally read and use to continue developing these classes with your questions. This is Abel Flores speaking. and I'm grateful that you're studying with us. Let's begin. Now, before explaining the Partzufim, it is essential to understand what the 10 sefirot are. First, let's clarify what the sefirot are not. They are not parts of God, nor separate entities. Nor are they beings, neither divine nor angelic. The sefirot are forces, energies. The most common term is emanations. Another point we must clarify immediately. Kabbalah, which is the mystical study of the Torah and the sacred scriptures, has two aspects, or rather, Kabbalah is divided into two, Maaseh Bereshit and Merkabah. The second, Merkabah, is the chariot and represents the spiritual elevation of man, mainly through meditations, mitzvot, and prayers. That is, it is an action from below upwards. That is why the chariot of the prophet Elijah, which is the Merkabah, ascends to the heavens. But the sefirot are precisely in the first aspect of Kabbalah, in Maaseh Bereshit, which translates from Hebrew as the works of creation, meaning that the sefirot are the emanations or energy that come from the infinite, where God is, and which built the cosmos, creation. Therefore, Maaseh Bereshit is something more theoretical and comes from above downwards.
Now, the sefirot, we repeat, are modes of manifestation, channels of expression, and structures of relationship between the Ein Sof, the divine infinitude or the infinite, and created reality. Kabbalah does not speak of the essence of God. This is Aristotelian philosophy. That is why Rambam Maimonides speaks of the essence of God. But really
in the Torah and Kabbalah, what is discussed is how the infinite reveals itself in the finite, contracts and organizes itself to make existence possible. That is, for God to create the world, he had to contract himself. For those familiar with computers, the Kabbalistic theory of Tzimtzum, where God contracts himself so as not to encompass everything and leave a space to create the world from nothing, in Hebrew, bara from Bereshit, is like the famous zip files, which compress memory and space but retain the same content. So, now you can understand that the tree of life is the diagram that organizes these 10 sefirot along with the 22 Hebrew letters and shows their flow, hierarchy, and interdependence. Without this schema, it is impossible to understand either the creation story in the Bible, or history, or the human soul, much less the Partzufim, which are advanced configurations of these same 10 sefirot. Now, before explaining the Partzufim, it is essential to understand each of the 10 sefirot. The first is Keter, the will, and in Hebrew it means crown, like the crown of the king, which is God. Keter represents the primordial will, the impulse prior to all thought. It is not yet thought, but the decision to be. It is the point where creation is desired, not conceived. Keter connects directly with the Ein Sof and acts as an interface between the infinite and the manifested. Its key is will, divine pleasure, supreme intention. You should know, and you can ask any Kabbalist with serious studies about this, that Keter is a mystery. That is, not even Kabbalah can explain what will is, where it comes from, what it means. It cannot explain why some human beings have the will to do something or certain things, and others do not. It is inexplicable, even more so the will of why God wanted to create the cosmos.
The second sephirah is Chochmah, which translates from Hebrew as wisdom. Chochmah is the initial flash of consciousness, the idea in its pure state, without development. It is absolute, rapid, and non-verbal intuition. If Keter is the will to create, Chochmah is the first what. Its key is the spark, intuition, insight. For example,
sometimes you have an idea, a great idea, and you don't know where it comes from. This happens because you connect with Chochmah. Prophecy is also found in Chochmah, which is why intuition is also there. For example, the intuition to make a good business deal or not, to choose this partner or another, to partner in this or that. All of this is Chochmah. The third sephirah is Binah, which translates from Hebrew as understanding. In some cases, it is also translated as science. Binah takes the spark of Chochmah and develops, analyzes, and structures it. It is articulated thought, expansion, and depth. In Binah, the notion of limit, form, and discernment appears for the first time. Its key is analysis, gestation, structure. It is logic, reasoning. The fourth sephirah is Hesed, which translates as grace or mercy, and also expansion, because grace has no limits. Chesed is the force of giving without limits. It is expansive love, absolute generosity, free flow. All creation needs Chesed to exist. Without expansion, there is no life. Its key is giving, love, and abundance. This sephirah is represented in the Torah by the patriarch Abraham, who was a charitable and pious man, which is why God took notice of him. The fifth sephirah is Gevurah, which translates from Hebrew as rigor or restriction. Gevurah is the force of limits, judgment, and containment. It balances Chesed, preventing chaos. It is not punishment, but rather precision and measure. Its key is discipline, limits, and judgment. In the Torah, it is represented by the patriarch Isaac, son of Abraham. The sixth sephirah is Tiferet, which translates from Hebrew as harmony or beauty. Tiferet integrates Chesed and Gevurah. It is conscious balance, the truth that arises from harmony. It is the emotional center of the tree of life, and the point where authentic compassion appears. Its key is balance, truth, and harmony, and it is represented in the Torah by the patriarch Jacob, who by achieving balance between Abraham, Chesed, and Isaac, Gevurah, gave birth to Tiferet. Therefore, Israel would be his name. The seventh sephirah is Netzach, which translates from Hebrew as victory and perseverance. Netzach is the energy of moving forward, of sustaining momentum despite obstacles. It represents action, strategy, and continuity. Key: constancy, progress, determination. This sephirah is represented in the scriptures by Moses. The eighth sephirah is Hod, which translates from Hebrew as splendor or recognition. Hod is the capacity to receive, recognize, and structure. Where Netzach pushes, Hod organizes. Where Netzach conquers, Hod understands. Its key is humility, communication, and form. And the priest Aaron is its representative in the Torah. The ninth sephirah is Yesod, which means foundation in Hebrew. Yesod is the transmission channel. It gathers all the higher energies and directs them towards manifestation. Without Yesod, nothing is materialized. Its key is connection, channeling, and linking. And it is represented in the Torah as Joseph. And the 10th and last sephirah is Malchut, which translates from Hebrew as kingdom. Malchut is the final reception, the manifested world, the concrete reality. It has no light of its own. It reflects what it receives. It is the place of human action and history. That is our reality, our life, the place and moment where you are right now. That is Malchut. In other words, Malchut is the present moment. It is palpable reality. Its key is reality, expression, and receptivity. And like Keter, it is not represented by any character. Although I tell you for certain that both Keter and Malchut are a mystery, they are the same sephirah, because the idea is to bring the will of God, which is in the Torah, in the Bible, into reality. If there is a character who should embody or represent these sephirot, I'm referring to Keter and Malchut. It must be the Messiah. Now, let's get down to business. Although there are 10 sephirot, you should know that they don't function in isolation. A common mistake is to study the sephirot as independent concepts. In reality, the sephirot always operate together, influencing each other and forming dynamic systems. This is where a key idea emerges. The sephirot, when organized as complete and functional structures, form partzufim. The partzufim are not something separate from the sephirot. They are configurations of sephirot acting as a coherent unit, with a head, body, and function. Without knowing Keter, Chochmah, and Binah, one cannot understand the mind of a partzuf. Without understanding from Chesed to Yesod, one cannot understand its emotional and operational dynamics. Without Malchut, one cannot understand how the partzuf impacts reality. Therefore, the study of the 10 sephirot is not optional. It is the absolute prerequisite for understanding the partzufim, the plagues of Egypt, the structure of the soul, redemption, and the spiritual meaning of history, where the number 10 is repeated multiple times. For example, in the 10 Commandments. So what does the word partzuf mean? It literally means face or configuration. In Kabbalah, it is not used in a superficial metaphorical sense, but in a technical one. A partzuf is a complete, organized, and functional spiritual structure, formed by sefirot that act as a coherent unit. If you want to understand it another way, the partzufim are groups of sefirot. While the sefirot are individual forces, the partzufim are integrated systems. It's the next step from studying elements to studying organisms, living organisms like the tree of life. In Lurianic Kabbalah, after the tzimtzum and the breaking of the vessels, shevirat hakelim, the sefirot cannot operate in isolation. Reality becomes fractured and unstable. The partzufim emerge as a corrective reorganization. Without partzufim, the light would be excessive and destructive. With partzufim, the light is integrated and channeled. During this short break in the middle of the class, we want to let you know that if you would like to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen or by clicking the link below in the description. I personally thank you very much for your contribution.
We continue. Now, each partzuf possesses a structure comparable to a living being. Rosh, head, includes Keter, Chochmah, and Binah. This is where decisions are made. How much light to receive, how, and with what intention. Guf, body, includes Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod.
Here the decision is transformed into process and action. Ein Sof, end, relates to Malchut. Here, the light is manifested or withheld. This illustrates a key principle. No spiritual action occurs without prior awareness. That is why the battle of our actions always takes place, first and foremost, in our minds.
So, now we're going to look at the main partzufim or faces of the sefirot, now that you know the technical Kabbalistic and Hebrew terms. In the classic system, 5 main partzufim are identified. The first is very famous. It is called Adam Kadmon and translates as primordial man or original man. That is, it is the ideal concept of what God wanted to create in his creation
before creation. It is the first general partzufim, the root of all worlds. It is not human, but an archetype of organization. It is the mind of God, his mind before creation. It is the secret of secrets, the mystery of mysteries. As an anecdotal fact, according to some Metzorite interpretations, this is what the Gospel of John, chapter 1, is talking about. In fact, this Gospel, although canonical, is not synoptic and is known by many authors as a Gnostic document, which in some way places it within Kabbalah. Although some people are bothered by this. If you noticed, this Adam Kadmon partzuf is pre-creation, because it precedes all the sefirot. Let's continue. So, the second partzuf is called Arij Anpin, which translates from Aramaic as long face or extended countenance. It is the expression of Keter, the first sephirah. It represents prolonged will and infinite patience. This partzuf is a single sephirah, which is Keter, but it enters Keter and multiplies. That is, 10 more sefirot emerge. For example, Keter of Keter, Chochmah of Keter, Binah of Keter, Chesed of Keter, and so on until Malchut. That is the group of sefirot of Arij Anpin. And in fact, here's a tip for future studies. This multiplication of sefirot happens with all of them. It is part of the degradation of energy from the infinite to bring it to the finite world. The third partzuf is called Abba, which in Hebrew means father. It is the expression of Chochmah. It is active wisdom, the creative impulse. And just like the previous one, when Malchut of Keter enters Chochmah, it then pairs with it and gives rise to 10 more sefirot, which are Keter of Chochmah, Chochmah of Chochmah, Binah of Chochmah, Chesed of Chochmah, and so on until Malchut, totaling 10 related sefirot. The fourth partzuf is Ima, which means mother in Hebrew, and is the expression of Binah. It is the structuring understanding and the maternal principle. And just like the previous one, it multiplies again with a new group of 10 sefirot. For example, Keter of Binah, Chochmah of Binah, Binah of Binah, etc. Then we come to the fifth partzuf, which is also very famous, as much as Adam Kadmon. And this one is called Zer Anpin, and translates from Aramaic as lesser face or small face. This is the largest group of sefirot, because there are 6, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. Here are the emotions. And as you know, and as psychologists themselves say, a large part of our problems in life Personality issues, decision-making, relationships, etc. stem from our emotions. This partzuf is very important for our daily lives. The configuration of the 6 emotional sefirot, which range from Chesed to Yesod, is crucial for making our tikkunim, or repairs, in our daily lives. To these is added Malchut, sometimes treated as an independent partzuf, the final recipient. And as you already know, in that partzuf of Malchut, 10 more sefirot multiply, such as Keter of Malchut, Chochmah of Malchut, Binah of Malchut, Chesed of Malchut, etc. Now, we will answer the second question we promised to address at the beginning of this video. In the context of Parashat Bo, the Partzufim, divine countenances, allow us to understand why. The first 7 plagues operate in the realm of Zair Anpin and Malchut, while the last 3 affect higher levels, linked to Abba and Ima, and the death of the firstborn. That is why the last plagues not only punish Egypt, but also break its spiritual root. From the perspective of Kabbalah, the 10 plagues are not arbitrary punitive acts. They are targeted spiritual interventions whose objective was to dismantle the spiritual structure of Egypt, Mitzrayim, narrowness, freeing Israel from its root. Each plague acts upon a sphere, but the sefirot operate within partzufim. Therefore, to truly understand the plagues, they must be analyzed at the level of partzufim, not just isolated sefirot.
The first 7 plagues are Zair Anpin and Malchut. The first 7 makot, blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, hail, act primarily on the realm of the partzuf Zair Anpin and its relationship with Malchut. Malchut is reception and manifestation, which in the case of Egypt was the Nile River. What does this mean? Egypt dominated the physical,
Economic, and political world. The first 7 plagues break emotional and operational control, destabilize the relationship between giving and receiving, and break the flow between Yesod and Malchut. In simple terms, Egypt loses dominion over concrete but physical reality, not spiritual reality. That is, it is an empire without a base, without a solid foundation, spiritually speaking, of course. The last 3 plagues, locusts, darkness, death of the firstborn, no longer operate in Zair Anpin, but in the higher partzufim, Abba, Chochmah, and Ima, Binah.
Locusts devastate all possibility of a future. Spiritually, it cuts off the flow of Chochmah. There is no project, no continuity. Darkness, it is not a lack of physical light. It is a blockage of Binah, an inability to understand, orient oneself, and differentiate. Death of the firstborn, it attacks the root of Egypt's spiritual
Continuity. The firstborn represents the first channel of transmission, the higher Yesod, anchored in Abba and Ima. Here there is no more negotiation. The system collapses, justice is served, rectification takes place, and Israel begins a new stage, one of the 4 stages of redemption.
Now we come to the third point we promised in the introduction. And here things get truly fascinating. The relationship between the sefirot and the human body. Because in the Jewish tradition, there is a fundamental principle that permeates all of mysticism. The human being is a microcosm. Everything that exists in the spiritual worlds also exists
reflected within the body and soul. Therefore, when the Torah says that God created man in his image, it is not talking about divine anatomy. God does not have arms or legs. It is talking about structure, about a spiritual design that is projected into the psyche, into consciousness, and yes, also into the body. Each sephirah has a concrete expression, and here an interesting bridge appears with other traditions. If you are familiar with the Eastern chakra system, you will notice surprising similarities. Not because one copied the other, but because both describe the same inner map, using different languages.
Keter, the will, is not located in the body as an organ. It is situated above the head. It is the profound intention, the sense of purpose, the very decision to live. It coincides with what in the East is called the crown chakra, the connection with the transcendent. Chochmah, wisdom, is expressed in the right hemisphere of the brain. It is the intuitive flash, the idea that appears without warning.
Its parallel is the upper part of the so-called third eye, direct inner vision. Binah, understanding, resides in the left hemisphere. It analyzes, orders, develops. It is the mind that takes the spark and transforms it into understanding. That is why it is associated with the lower part of the third eye. Chesed, expansion, resides in the right arm, giving, loving, opening up. Gevurah, restriction, in the left arm, limit, strength, self-control. Both converge in Tiferet, the chest, the heart, where emotion, compassion, and truth are integrated. Netzach propels the legs forward. It is perseverance and action. Hod structures, organizes, and communicates. Yesod connects, transmits, and links from the vital energy. And finally, Malchut, the feet, the physical body, where everything becomes concrete reality. The teaching is clear. To know oneself spiritually is to learn to inhabit one's own body with awareness. Because there is no mysticism without life, nor spirituality that is not embodied. That's all for today's class. Shalom.